The day a Native American elder told me his tribe held a generations-long communion with the creature we call Bigfoot, my pragmatic mind cast it aside as folklore, a whisper of myth meant to guard their sacred lands. But the tapestry of secrets he unveiled the chilling truth of their existence. The secluded valleys they called home, the profound reasons for their silence would lead me to a terrifying ordeal that no field manual could ever cover. My name is Mike Johnson, and my world until then was one of maps and measurements, a humble trail inspector for the U.S. Forest Service. For 12 long years, my boots had traced thousands of miles across the untamed canvas of the Pacific Northwest. My purpose, a simple verse to document, to mark, to keep the wild safe for the civilized. It was a life of pure logic, a rhythm of measure, document, report, a world without specters or whispers from the shadows. There were only trees, trails, and the occasional black bear that sent tourists scrambling. That is, until the June of 1991, when the veil between my world and another was torn, and the forest I knew was lost to me forever. It began on a mundane Monday morning at the ranger station in Pine Ridge, Oregon, after I arrived in my Forest Service pickup, a white 1988 Chevy K1500, its door branded with the iconic green pine. I was anticipating another routine week of trail assessments, but instead I discovered my supervisor, Steve Williams, caught in a quiet storm of his own. He paced his small office like a caged animal, a decade of composure erased from his face. "Mike, thank God you're here," he said, his voice taut as he waved me inside. "We have a serious situation brewing on the Columbia River Trail system. Specifically, Section 7, right on the edge of the ancient groves." I set down my thermos, the familiar scent of coffee, a small comfort, and opened my field notebook. "Define situation, Steve." The trail maintenance crew, they've walked off the job for the third day running. Steve raked a hand through his thinning gray hair. "They're claiming the area is wrong, whatever in God's name that's supposed to mean." My eyebrow arched in skepticism. These crews were seasoned men, their character forged by the wilderness itself. They weren't prone to flights of fancy. Wrong how so? That's the heart of it. They're vague, almost superstitious. Martinez, the crew chief, was resolute. He just said they are not going back, that the very air feels corrupted, and there's damage that defies all logic. Steve unfolded a large topographic map, a paper landscape of contours and streams, and his finger jabbed at a stark red circle. "I need you to venture into that wound on the map, Mike. Inspect the conditions, find the source of this fear, and bring me back a report grounded in reason." I offered the simplest explanation a branch to grasp. "It's probably just a territorial bear leaving its mark. Maybe a sow with cubs even. It's early June after all." That's what I told Martinez. Steve sighed, leaning back in his chair, the springs groaning in protest. His reply was chillingly simple. "It's not bears." Look, I don't subscribe to spooky campfire stories, but I do believe in procedure. If there's genuine trail damage, we need a formal assessment for repairs. And if this is just a case of mountain madness of the crew's minds playing tricks on them, I need that documented as well. I gave a solemn nod, my mind already a checklist of gear. "When do I leave?" His answer was immediate: today. A pack for 3 days, perhaps 4. The section in question is a remote 8-mile trek in from the Cascade Falls trailhead. You'll find the stone skeleton of an old fire lookout tower about a mile past the affected area. It's a good place to make camp if needed. 2 hours later, the weight of my mission settled onto my shoulders, a 45-pound pack loaded into the bed of my truck. My field kit was a familiar litany of survival tent stove first aid and the instruments of my trade compass maps, measuring tools. I also brought my mechanical eye, a Nikon N8008, with several rolls of Kodak film to capture the unvarnished truth. I included my handheld CB radio, a fragile tether to the world of men, knowing full well that in the deep silent valleys its voice would likely be swallowed by the mountains. The journey to the Cascade Falls trailhead was a 90-minute pilgrimage over forest roads scarred by winter and time, my truck bucking and swaying on ruts ungraded since the previous summer. I saw only 2 other ghosts of civilization on the entire ascent, a colossal logging truck groaning its way back to town and a battered Subaru wagon, likely pilgrims seeking the solace of the falls. The trailhead parking area stood as an empty, silent stage. When I arrived just past 1 p.m., I spent 20 minutes performing the lonely ritual of the woodsman, organizing my pack, checking my equipment, and poring over the map a final time. Section 7 was etched clearly on the page, a 5-mile serpent of a trail that coiled through ancient groves of Douglas fir and western red cedar clinging to the high ridge above the mighty Columbia River. My notes outlined the crew's prosaic task to clear the arteries of the trail, the drainage ditches, and to mend the wounds left by the spring thaw's relentless runoff. I shouldered my pack and took my first steps into the green silence. The first few miles were a comforting prelude, a trail I knew like the lines on my own hand. If you appreciate these forays into the unknown, please consider liking this video and sharing it with a fellow adventurer. The path was well-trodden, offering fleeting glimpses of the river shimmering far below. The forest here possessed a sacred hush, the kind of hallowed beauty found only in cathedrals of ancient trees, where massive trunks stood as living pillars and sunlight filtered through a high canopy painted the forest floor in shifting mosaics of light. Let me know in the comments if you've ever felt that profound sense of awe in an old-growth forest. Some 4 miles into my trek, a subtle discord began to weave itself into the forest's familiar symphony. It wasn't a sudden cacophony, but a quiet subtraction, a feeling that the woods were holding their breath. The birdsong, once a vibrant chorus, now seemed a distant, muted echo. For the last half hour, not a single squirrel or chipmunk had chattered or dashed across my path. A silence both profound and deeply unsettling for this time of year. The very air seemed to thicken, pressing down with a weight that had no place in the day's clear forecast. A pressure felt not in the lungs, but in the soul. It was upon reaching Section 7 that the reason for the crew's silent retreat became starkly, chillingly clear. Before me lay a scene of inexplicable ruin, a tableau of both immense power and strange design. It began with a Douglas fir, a titan of the forest, likely 80 feet of solid timber with a trunk 3 feet thick that had been pushed over. Not felled by an axe nor snapped by a gale, but simply shoved from its ancient mooring. Its massive root ball was torn violently from the ground, a raw wound in the earth, still clutching fistfuls of soil like a dying man. Yet the trunk was sound, betraying no sign of the rot or disease that might have authored its demise. Stranger still, its final resting place defied the logic of the prevailing winds, a silent testament to a force that followed its own incomprehensible laws. A mere 50 yards on, the mystery deepened. A colossal stump, the ghost of an old-growth cedar harvested decades past, had been wrenched from its earthy tomb and cast aside, landing a full 20 feet from the trail. This relic would have weighed several hundred pounds, its anchoring roots long surrendered to dust. And yet some impossible force had plucked it from the soil and tossed it like a child's toy. I documented it all with the cold precision of my profession: photographs, compass bearings, meticulous measurements. As I worked, my practical mind raced a frantic search for an explanation that would fit within the known world. What do you guys think could have done this? Drop your theories in the comments below. I'd love to read them. A landslide. The surrounding terrain was as solid as bedrock. Heavy equipment. Not a single track marred the forest floor, and this section was miles from any logging access. An earthquake. The geological records showed nothing, not a tremor in months. The trail itself was savaged, in places scarred with deep gouges in the earth wounds that disturbingly resembled claw marks, but on a scale that dwarfed any bear I had ever encountered or imagined. I was kneeling, documenting one final peculiar disturbance, a clearing where the very life of the forest floor had been crushed flat in a nearly perfect circle some 15 feet across. It was then that a voice, quiet yet resonant as the earth itself, spoke from behind me. "You should not be here." I whirled around, my hand flying to the bear spray at my hip by pure instinct. There, about 20 feet down the path, stood an elderly Native American man. His attire was practical standard hiking gear, simple jeans, a red flannel, a weathered canvas jacket, but he possessed a quiet gravitas, an ancient dignity that his humble clothes could not conceal. His face was a roadmap of seasons etched with lines as deep as canyons. His face was a testament to the sun and the wind, a chronicle of seasons etched into his skin, and his long gray hair was bound in a simple, elegant ponytail. He leaned upon a walking stick of carved cedar, its surface polished to a silken sheen by a lifetime of journeys. "I'm Mike Johnson with the U.S. Forest Service," I stated, my posture relaxing a fraction though my senses remained on high alert. He had moved with the silence of a shadow. I hadn't heard so much as a snapping twig. "I'm just conducting a trail inspection." "I know who you are." The man's voice rumbled back, each word measured and deep, carrying a cadence that seemed to echo from the land itself, an accent I could not place on any map. "I am James Running. My people have been the eyes and ears of these woods for more generations than can be counted." I gave a respectful nod. "My apologies if I'm trespassing on restricted land. My maps show this as Mount Hood National Forest open to the public." "Your maps," he said, a hint of ancient wisdom in his tone, "show the lines your government has drawn. They do not show the lines that truly matter." James Running took a slow step closer, leaning on his cedar staff. "The boundaries that hold meaning here are older than your maps, older than your nation." Despite a lifetime of scientific skepticism, a deep-seated resistance to what he called mystical forest talk, there was a certainty in his gaze, an undeniable truth in his bearing that compelled me to listen. "What boundaries?" I asked. "There is a part of this forest," he began, pointing northeast with his stick, "that begins on yonder ridge." He pointed with his cedar staff. "It starts at Thunder Ridge and stretches to the old burn scar near Eagle Creek. My people, we have a covenant and understanding with the ones who dwell within. We do not cross into their domain without invitation. In return, they honor ours, and we live in peace." "The ones who dwell there," I echoed, choosing my words with care. "Are you talking about bears, cougars?" James's eyes, dark and profound as the forest floor, held mine. "You know of what I speak, Mike Johnson. You have read the signs yourself. The trees tossed aside by a strength that no machine of your world possesses. The earth itself, clawed by hands that leave no print your science can decipher." A cold shiver born of something other than the air traced a path down my spine. Are you talking about Sasquatch?" "That is one name your people use," he corrected gently. "We call them the forest people. They were here before the oldest of these trees were seeds. They are older than your nation and older than mine." It's a powerful thought, isn't it? If you've enjoyed this journey into the unknown so far, please hit that like button and subscribe for more. James gestured with a sweep of his arm to the chaos surrounding us. "This is not random destruction. This is a message, a warning. They are telling your people to stay away." Every fiber of my rational, scientifically trained mind screamed in protest, but the raw physical evidence laid bare at my feet was impossible to deny. "How long," I asked, my voice quieter now, "has your tribe had this understanding?" "Since a time before my grandfather's grandfather drew his first breath. We honor the boundary markers with offerings, the first salmon from the runs, the ripest berries of the season, the gift of venison in the deep of winter. We teach our children the paths of safety and the shadowed trails they must never tread. In return, the forest people allow us this fragile peace, sharing the lands." As he spoke, a shadow passed over James's features and his expression grew dark. "But your people, their ears are closed to the whispers of the wild. You carve paths where no path should ever be, bringing the cacophony of your machines, your clamor, your crowds. You trample upon the sacred lines, Mr. Running. I respect your cultural insights truly, but my duties are clear. My task is to evaluate this damage to the trail and submit a formal report." "This is no random act of nature," James interjected, his voice low. "Observe where the ruin lies. Each fallen giant, every stump ripped from its earthly cradle. They are markers on an ancient boundary. The people of the woods are sending an unmistakable message. Their silent scream is, 'Go back.'" I surveyed the chaos with a new understanding, and I could not deny the stark geometry of the pattern. The path of devastation carved a crude line, a scar running from northeast to southwest, just as James had foretold. Even if there is truth in your words, I began choosing my own with care. My orders compel me to inspect the entire section. I must press on for at least another 2 miles, meticulously documenting the conditions. Then, James warned, you will be stepping into their domain. A profoundly unwise choice. I'll roll the dice." James regarded me for a long, silent moment, a heavy sigh escaping his lips. You carry the certainty of a man who has yet to face the truly incomprehensible. Yet there is a core of honor about you. So I will offer this wisdom. If you are determined to proceed, shun the gloaming hours. Neither dusk nor dawn should find you on that path. Never let your provisions out of your sight. And if you hear the knocking in the woods, 3 distinct strikes, evenly spaced, you are to turn without hesitation and retreat. Do you comprehend the wood knocks? It is their language, striking trees with stone or limb. 3 knocks serve as a warning. More than 3, it means your life is in peril. As he spoke, James reached deep into his jacket pocket, and from it he produced a small, worn leather pouch. "Take this," he urged. "It holds tobacco and sage. Should you meet one of them, place it on the ground as an offering and retreat with measured steps. It is a gesture of respect." Though every rational fiber in me screamed against it, I accepted the pouch. Its scent was an ancient perfume of smoke and dried herbs. "I am grateful, but I am certain it will be unnecessary. I pray that you are right." James turned as if to depart, but then hesitated. There is a reason the forest folk have grown so hostile of late. Something has stirred in the deep woods, driving them from their ancient territories. They are being pressed toward the edges of their world, and fear has made them fiercely defensive. And whatever hunts them is a far greater shadow than your trail crews. Remember that. He then moved away down the path with a grace that defied his years, vanishing like a spirit around a bend in the trail. For long minutes I stood frozen, the leather talisman warm in my hand, gazing at the sylvan ruin around me. I couldn't help but wonder what abyss I had just stepped to the edge of. Have you ever had a moment like that, a feeling of pure dread? Share your story in the comments. But I was Mike Johnson, a trail inspector for the U.S. Forest Service. I had a duty to perform, and no collection of campfire tales, no matter how chilling, would deter me from it. I hoisted my pack, the weight a familiar comfort, and pressed onward, stepping over the very line James Running had sworn was a threshold never to be breached. In less than 2 hours, the full crushing weight of my error would be revealed to me. For the woods transformed the very instant I passed over what James Running had named the boundary. It was nothing my instruments could quantify, nothing I could capture in the dry language of my field notes. Yet the change was as palpable as a physical blow. The very air grew heavy, pressing down with a suffocating weight. The afternoon sun, which should have been strong, filtered through the canopy as a weak, anemic light, though my watch confirmed it was merely 3:30 in the afternoon. 45 minutes had passed since my strange meeting with James, and the destruction along the trail had intensified. Now branches were torn away at impossible heights. A full 8, 9, even 10 feet from the ground on ancient trees snapped with a surgical precision as if a titan had casually reached up and twisted them from their sockets. I documented each violation, the clinical act of photographing and noting measurements a small comfort. But it was the silence, a profound and absolute void of sound, that truly unsettled me. In 12 years of this work, I had never known a quiet so complete. No birdsong pierced the stillness. No insect hummed in the air. Even the breath of the wind seemed to have been extinguished, leaving the colossal old-growth sentinels standing in a frozen, deathly calm. The only symphony was the ragged rhythm of my own breathing and the solitary crunch of my boots. My mind scrambled for a rational anchor. Perhaps a great predator was near. If you're finding this story as gripping as I did living it, do me a favor and smash that like button. It really helps the channel. A cougar, or perhaps a bear, something to frighten the smaller creatures into hiding. But that logic was a thin blanket against the chilling wrongness that permeated the air, a primal alarm shrieking in the oldest part of my mind to flee. And yet I walked on. Call it professional pride, call it sheer pig-headedness. I knew Steve Williams was waiting for my report, and I would not allow superstition to compromise my duty. Then, around mile marker 7, I found it the first piece of undeniable proof. There, in a patch of damp earth by a trickling stream, pressed with incredible force into the mud. As I knelt to examine it, the fragile fortress of my rational world began to turn to dust. The print was a thing of nightmares, at least 17 inches in length and a full 7 inches wide at the ball. It was undeniably the shape of a foot, with 5 distinct impressions for toes, a poem written in mud. But the meter was all wrong, its proportions a jarring verse against the familiar ballad of man. The breadth was unnatural, the toes too thick and splayed like the roots of an old oak. I pulled out my tape measure, a tool of cold fact against this primal art, and documented every detail. The print sank a full 2 inches deep, a testament to a weight that oppressed the very earth. Through the dry arithmetic of pressure displacement in the damp soil, I conjured an estimate a weight somewhere between 500 and 700 pounds. No mortal man could bear such a burden and still move with the grace to navigate this tangled woodland. More prints stitched a path away from the stream, a silent narrative leading onward. They charted a course northeast into the hallowed gloom of the old-growth forest. The spacing was a steady 4 feet apart, the cadence of a walk, not the panicked rhythm of a run. Something of immense size had wandered through here, its passage so recent the edges of the prints remained as sharp as a fresh wound likely within the last few hours. I sat back on my heels, my camera a modern eye staring at a prehistoric truth. This was the very story James Running had told me the whispers of the forest people made flesh and mud. Sasquatch Bigfoot. Whatever name you dare to speak something had etched these marks, and it was no mere bear walking on 2 legs as the comfortable lies of skeptics always claimed. I took a flurry of photographs from different angles. If you've ever seen something you can't explain in the wild, tell me about it in the comments. Your story deserves to be heard. I placed my government-issue boot beside one colossal print for scale, a stark and humbling comparison, and captured several more frames. These images were bound for my official report, and Steve Williams would be forced to contend with the uncomfortable truths this evidence screamed. The only question that mattered now pulsed in my own throat. What was my next move on this suddenly terrifying chessboard? I was still a long mile shy of the old fire lookout's foundation, my intended sanctuary for the night. The sun had granted me another 4 hours of golden light. The sensible voice in my head, the voice of reason, urged me to continue my inspection. To document the rest of the trail, pitch my tent, and follow the script. But James's warning was a haunting refrain in my mind, * do not travel at dusk or dawn. My watch read 4:15 in the afternoon. With a hard push, I could reach the lookout by 5:30 my camp, a small island of order in the growing twilight. Or I could turn my back on this mystery now. I could report what I'd seen, and let this shadowed section of trail become someone else's problem, or perhaps no one's at all. The decision, however, was torn from my hands by a sound that turned my blood to ice. 3 sharp, perfectly timed impacts echoed like gunshots through the cathedral of trees. Wood striking wood loud and filled with an undeniable purpose. The sound originated from somewhere up the trail, perhaps a quarter of a mile away. After a breathless pause, it came again. * Crack. 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 And the memory of James's words surfaced. * 3 knocks means warning. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I rose slowly, my hand instinctively seeking the bear spray on my belt, though I knew it was a child's toy against whatever sentinel guarded these woods. The small leather pouch James had given me was a warm weight in my jacket pocket, and my fingers found it clinging to it like a prayer. The knocking did not repeat. The forest fell into a profound and watchful silence. I stood at a crossroads of fear and duty. Press on or retreat, every nerve, every primal instinct screamed for me to run. But I had come this far, I had seen this much. To write a complete report, I needed the full story, and so I made a compromise with my own terror. I would continue to the Lookout Foundation. What would you do? Push forward, or run? Let me know in the comments, and if this story has you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. I would set up camp in the security of the remaining daylight, and in the bright, unforgiving light of morning, I would hike that final mile of trail before turning back toward the world I once knew. This plan would grant me complete documentation while appeasing the screaming voice of self-preservation. The decision made, I began walking once more, but each step was now a careful, measured thing, my senses straining to decode every whisper and rustle of the woods around me. The trail climbed relentlessly, winding through a gallery of ever larger old-growth cedars. Some of these trees were easily 500 years old, their trunks a colossal 8 feet in diameter. They had stood here before Columbus sailed the ocean, blue, silent witnesses to ages of unwritten history, their secrets locked deep within their rings. 20 minutes later, I found another piece of the puzzle. A great cedar had been stripped of its bark in a violent vertical line starting 5 feet from the ground and reaching for the sky at nearly 12 feet high. The exposed wood was raw, still weeping sweet sap. Whatever had done this possessed a reach and a strength that defied imagination. I photographed the wound, noting the deep raking scratches in the pale wood beneath. They looked for all of the world like a giant's fingers had dug into the bark and simply torn it away like paper. Then my eyes fell upon the structure. It was set back about 15 feet from the trail, half veiled by the lush undergrowth. At first glance, it seemed a mere tangle of fallen trees, a chaotic sculpture of decay. But as I crept closer, the deliberate, almost architectural arrangement became terrifyingly clear. Someone, or some asterisk thing, had stacked heavy branches and entire logs to create a crude teepee, a primitive shelter rising roughly 8 feet tall and 6 feet wide at its base. The craftsmanship was primal, brutish. But it was brutally effective, with branches so cleverly interwoven they would surely form a waterproof roof. This was no shelter built by human hands. No hiker would erect such a monument so large, so deep in this wild, forgotten place. And the very bones of this structure, branches a full 6 inches thick, spoke of a strength that was almost mythological, a force required to bend and place them with such intention. I moved around the edifice like an archaeologist before a forgotten idol, my camera capturing it from every conceivable angle. And there near its roots I found another clue: coarse tufts of dark brown hair, inches long, snagged on the rough bark like a cryptic offering. With a reverence born of protocol, I carefully collected a few strands in a sterile plastic bag. It was the proper way to document evidence, a small island of procedure in a sea of utter bewilderment. The sun began its slow descent, painting the forest floor with long skeletal shadows. A glance at my watch confirmed the hour, 5:20 p.m. It was time to press on to reach the lookout site and make my camp. While the day's last golden light remained, I quickened my pace, my heart yearning for the perceived sanctuary of the foundation clearing. That old fire lookout, a ghost from the 1960s, was my destination. All that was left was its concrete ghost, a stark platform littered with the rusted metal sinews of its former self. Yet it offered a slight elevation, a vantage point with clear lines of sight, a small, crucial advantage. It was about as close to a defensible bastion as this wilderness would grant me. I finally reached it at 5:45 p.m., the sun still a comforting orb above the horizon. What's the most remote place you've ever camped? Let me know in the comments below. The clearing greeted me like a familiar memory from past inspections. A flat concrete scar, roughly 12 feet square, ringed by the crumbling foundations of forgotten machinery. A faint ghost of an access trail struggled against nature's relentless advance. The green tide was reclaiming everything, but the stark geometry of the place, so clearly man-made, offered a strange, almost illogical comfort. I raised my small shelter with practiced haste, using heavy stones to anchor the corners as the unyielding concrete would not accept my stakes. My stove found its place on a nearby flat rock, and I arranged my gear within the tent, creating a small sphere of order. My bottled water would suffice for the night. The stream would offer its replenishment on my return journey at dawn. But throughout these small domestic rituals, I could not shed a creeping, primal certainty I was being observed. Time and again I would freeze my eyes raking the tree line, only to find a silent audience of trees and deepening shadows. And yet the feeling remained, a cold prickle at the nape of my neck, as if the forest itself had eyes and they were all fixed unblinking upon me. By 6:30 in the evening, my small fortress was complete. I performed the simple rites of a camper, heating water for instant coffee and bringing a packet of beef stroganoff back to life for my lonely supper. This familiar routine was a balm to my frayed nerves, a mantra of normalcy. I was a U.S. Forest Service employee, simply doing my job, camping in a national forest I knew like the back of my hand. Surely, I told myself, the strange things I had found had logical explanations. They simply had to. But, as twilight bled across the sky and the woods became a wall of impenetrable black around my tiny island of light, the fortress of rationality began to crumble. The performance began around 8 o'clock. At first, a rustling in the brush perhaps 50 yards to my east. The sound of something immense parting the undergrowth with disdainful ease. Then an absolute silence descended. 10 minutes passed each one an eternity before the sound came again, this time from the north and closer, then west, then south. It was a patrol, a slow, deliberate circling of my camp. It kept itself veiled in darkness, always just beyond the reach of my flashlight's probing beam. I sat on the cold concrete, my back pressed hard against the thin fabric of my tent, a fragile shell. In one hand I held the flashlight, my sword of light. In the other, the canister of bear spray, my meager shield. My attempts to pierce the silence with the CB radio were met with nothing but the hiss of static. I was completely, utterly alone. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more. At 8:30, the sound resolved into a terrifying clarity. These were footsteps, not the four-legged rhythm of a bear or a cougar, but the two-legged cadence of something else. Heavy, deliberate, and drawing ever closer. My thumb flicked the switch and my light sliced through the night, sweeping the perimeter. It revealed nothing but the stoic trunks of trees and the gaping mouth of darkness. But now I could hear it breathing. A deep, resonant respiration like a great bellows working somewhere in the ink just beyond my small circle of light. "I'm a U.S. Forest Service ranger," I called out, hating the tremor that betrayed the terror in my own voice. "I'm only camping for the night," I pleaded. "I mean you no harm." And just like that, the breathing ceased. The world plunged back into an absolute, ringing silence. It was the kind of oppressive quiet that feels like a held breath, the world waiting for a thunderclap. I waited. My light held steady, my pulse a drum in my ears. Then it came 5 sharp percussive knocks on wood in rapid fire directly ahead of me, perhaps 30 yards into the black. This was no warning. It was a challenge, a declaration. And it was answered instantly from the darkness directly behind me. My blood ran cold. There were at least 2. I was caught in a pincer of unseen predators, and then a memory surfaced, James Running's small pouch in my jacket pocket. My hands, clumsy with fear, fumbled for it. I drew it out, loosened the drawstring, and poured its sacred contents, a mixture of tobacco and dried sage, onto the cold concrete before me. "This is a gift," I announced to the listening darkness, my voice ringing with a desperate formality. "It's a sign of my respect. I will be gone at first light. Please. I mean, no disrespect to your territory." For a moment that stretched into an age, the world held still. Nothing, and then it came. A sound from a world beyond my knowing. It began as a rumble so low it was felt more than heard, a subsonic vibration in my bones that swelled and crested into a soul-shattering, howling cry that tore through the forest and echoed into the stars. What do you think made that sound? Share this video with a friend who loves a good mystery, and let's see what they think. The sound was not of aggression, but of something far more profound, a power that echoed through the ancient woods, a summons carrying both keen intellect and a solemn warning. From the shadowed veils a reply was thrown back, and then another, a trinity of distinct voices weaving a conversation across the twilight. It was a council of giants I knew, and I was their subject. They were debating the fate of the trespasser in their sacred halls. I remained a statue, my light. A trembling finger pointed at the humble gift I'd left, trying to project a peace I did not feel while every fiber of my being screamed, "Flee!" A primal urge warring with the wisdom of James. Running back away slowly, for to run is to invite the hunt. Then, as if a verdict had been reached, the calling ceased. A silence heavy as a shroud fell upon the forest. And there, at the edge of my beam, a shadow took form, stepping from the tapestry of night into the clearing. The creature stood just beyond the ruin of the foundation, a colossus framed by my light, and my mind, like a fractured mirror, struggled to assemble the image. It was immense, easily 7.5 feet of raw living power, perhaps even more. A cloak of dark brown hair, thick and matted like the forest floor itself, covered its form with a great ruff of longer hair about its shoulders, a wild and noble mane. Its chest was a fortress impossibly broad, and its arms, like the mighty limbs of an oak, hung past where a human's knees would be, ending in hands that were a paradox of man and beast. But it was the face that truly held me captive in a spell of terror and awe. It was not the face of an ape from some grainy forgotten film, but something far more ancient and complex. A brow heavy with the weight of ages, a nose broad and flat, a mouth that seemed to hold the capacity for both silence and thunder. And its eyes, those dark knowing eyes, captured my light and threw it back in a burning amber gleam. In their depths I saw an awareness that sent a chill through my very soul. This was no simple animal. This was a being that thought, that reasoned, that understood the nature of the frail human thing standing before it. We stood as two worlds meeting across a silent chasm for what felt like an eon, but was likely no more than 30 seconds. The giant made no hostile move, its posture one of pure, patient observation. I could hear the deep measured rhythm of its breath, each exhalation a small cloud of life in the cooling air. And now the scent of it reached me. A primal musk like a wet wolf mixed with the rich decay of the forest loam, not foul, but utterly, undeniably wild. With infinite slowness its gaze shifted from my face out to the humble offering of tobacco and sage I had placed upon the concrete slab. It took a single deliberate step forward, a movement of such controlled power that I had to anchor myself to the earth to keep from bolting. It was now a mere 15 feet from me, a distance it could cross in a heartbeat. It bent to a crouch, and I realized with a jolt of disbelief that even kneeling it was as tall as I. One massive hand with fingers that must have been 8 inches long reached toward the offering on the ground. The movement was one of startling delicacy, almost a gesture of reverence as it gathered a portion of the herbs and brought them to its face. The great being then inhaled a long, deep draft. A low rumble vibrated from its chest, a sound I felt in my own bones more than I heard with my ears. It then rose to its full magnificent height and, stepping backward, dissolved into the shadows as silently as a wisp of fog. I could hear its passage through the undergrowth, the sounds fading into the symphony of the night until they were gone. The other sentinels I had felt circling me seemed to retreat as well. In moments, the crushing weight of being watched had vanished. If your heart is pounding, just hearing this, hit that like button to let me know you're with me on this journey. I collapsed to the ground, shaking. I fought to tell myself it was a dream, a waking nightmare born of solitude and shadow, but the scattered tobacco was proof. The wild, musky scent still hung in the air, a ghost of its presence. And my camera, the very reason I was here, remained in my tent, forgotten. I was too consumed by primal fear to even conceive of capturing such a sacred, terrifying moment. Sleep, of course, was a distant country I could not reach. The rest of the night was a vigil, my back against the thin wall of my tent, armed with a flashlight bear spray and a tiny pocket knife, paltry talismans against the titans of the woods, but they made me feel slightly less fragile. Every snap of a twig was a thunderclap. Every shifting shadow held the form of a watching giant. But the camp remained untouched, an island of peace granted by the forest's sovereign. The dawn arrived not as a sunrise, but as a reprieve, a divine mercy. The moment the trail became a visible thread, I broke camp with trembling hands, cramming my gear into my pack with no care for order, and began the journey back from whence I came. To heck with professional documentation. My only mission now was to escape this hallowed ground and find James running. The descent was a blur. Fear and adrenaline, the twin engines driving my legs. I passed the lean-to, saw the stripped tree, the imprints by the stream. In the clarity of daylight, they seemed less a part of a nightmare, but no less real. It had happened. Every impossible second of it. I reached the boundary, the place I first met James running, at around 8:30 in the morning. The devastation I had so clinically documented the day before now looked entirely different. Not the random chaos of a storm, but a deliberate script, a clear set of boundary markers that declared in a language older than words, "Go no further." How could I have been so lost in the text, yet so blind to the living story around me? I was contemplating one of the toppled giants of the forest when a voice familiar as a river's current flowed from behind me. "You have crossed a boundary not meant for you." I turned to see James running on the trail, leaning upon his cedar walking stick. His expression held no surprise, only a deep abiding sadness and perhaps a whisper of disappointment. "I'm sorry," I said, and the sincerity in my own voice startled me. "You were right about everything. It was my arrogance that kept me from listening." James moved closer, his weathered face a landscape of wisdom studying mine. "You saw one of them." It was a statement, not a question. "Yes," I confessed. "Last night. It came to my camp. I used the tobacco and sage you gave me, and I believe it accepted the offering. It touched it, inhaled its essence, and then retreated into the night. But there were others. I could hear them circling like ghosts in the trees, but only one revealed itself." James nodded slowly, a motion that seemed as ancient as the trees. "You were granted a great fortune. They could have simply driven you out, or far worse. That they acknowledged your offering means—" "I did. They recognized it as a traditional sign of respect." He paused, his gaze weighing the gravity of the moment. "Tell me exactly what transpired. Every detail." We sat upon a fallen log, a throne in that silent green kingdom, and I recounted the entire odyssey, the impossible tracks, the woven shelter, the percussive knocks that echoed through the woods, the haunting vocalizations, and finally the face-to-face meeting that had altered my reality. James listened with the patience of a mountain, never interrupting, offering only the occasional nod or a soft sound of understanding. When my tale was done, a profound silence settled between us for a long moment. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and resonant. "What you saw was likely a male, a guardian of these lands. The forest people have different roles within their clans, just as we do. Some are providers, some are nurturers, and some are watchers of the boundaries. You, my friend, have met one of their sentinels." "How long," I had to ask, "have you and your tribe been in contact with them?" "My people have shared these lands for centuries untold," he began. "But this active contact, the meetings, the offerings, the shared communication, that began in my grandfather's time, perhaps 80 years ago. There was a cruel winter around 1912 or 1913 when both our peoples were struggling against starvation. The game had vanished. The salmon runs had failed. An ancestor of mine, hunting in desperation far from our usual grounds, came upon a family of the forest people. They were starving, especially their young ones." James's eyes grew distant, looking into the mists of a story passed down through generations. My ancestor made a choice. He had taken a single deer, barely enough for his own family, but he saw the children of the forest were fading. He left half the meat for them and returned to his village. The very next dawn, he found a bounty of salmon at his doorstep, more than his entire family could eat. The forest people had answered his act of kindness with one of their own. That single act began the pact. It was the birth of an understanding that has deepened with the turning of seasons. We learn to read their signs, and they in turn learn to read ours. We meet at specific times when the seasons turn at the equinoxes and solstices in sacred hidden places. We bring offerings. They bring knowledge. They tell us where the salmon will run thick as silver, where the berries will be most plentiful. In return, we tell them where your people, the Forest Service, the loggers, the hikers will be active so they can remain in the shadows undisturbed. I thought of the maintenance crews and their sudden refusal to work. "Is that why you're here now? To warn them about the new trail work?" "Partly," he admitted, but his expression darkened like a coming storm. "But also because something is deeply wrong. For the past 3 months, the forest people have been disturbed, their ancient peace shattered. They have abandoned their traditional territories deep in the mountains and are moving closer to the boundaries. That is why you have seen so many territorial markings, so much damage meant as a warning. They're being driven out of their home ranges by something." "Pushed out by what?" I asked. "That is the question that haunts my days," he replied. "What do you guys think could be powerful enough to displace these beings? Let us know your theories in the comments below. 2 weeks ago, under the dark of the new moon, I met with one of their elders at the traditional meeting place near Eagle Creek. She is impossibly old. I have been meeting with her for 40 years since I was a young man. She showed me something." James reached into his jacket and pulled out a Polaroid photograph, a faded and slightly blurred ghost of a moment. "She took me deep into the forest to places where even my people rarely tread, and she showed me this." He handed me the photograph. It showed a part of the forest that had been utterly annihilated. This wasn't the work of fire or loggers. It was something else. Massive trees were snapped in half at varying heights as if by some impossible violent force. The ground itself was ripped open, and in the center was a crater-like depression roughly circular, maybe 30 feet across. "What could have caused this?" I whispered, staring at the image. "We don't know," he said grimly. "But this is one of 3 such sites found in the high country over the past 4 months. Each time the forest people find one, they move their families further away from that area. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, do us a favor and hit that like button and share this video. You won't want to miss what we uncover next." Their fear, Mr. Johnson, is a whisper on the wind. The forest people beings who have weathered the turning of 1,000 ages in these mountains are now afraid of a new trespasser in their sacred domain. A sudden frost, as if from a forgotten crypt, traced a path down my spine. "Have you shared this with anyone?" I asked. "The Forest Service, the park authorities, and spin what yarn for them. That the very spirits your government dismisses as myth are being terrorized by some unseen devastation in the heart of the woods, I would be branded a foolish old man lost in fables." James, running, gently took the photograph back. "But your own eyes have seen. You know the truth is not a shadow, and you walk with the authority of the Forest Service. Perhaps you can venture where I am not permitted. I am a keeper of trails, not a seeker of secrets. I don't have that kind of authority. You have eyes and a camera," he countered. "You hold the maps and the keys to gates I cannot pass." "And now," James said, rising to his feet and leaning on his walking stick, "you possess a piece of the puzzle that most of your colleagues are missing. The forest people are a thread in this grand tapestry, an integral part of this ecosystem. Mr. Johnson, their harmony with this land predates written history. If something is so profound that it drives them from the homes of their ancestors, it is a sickness that threatens the entire forest. Not only them, but all life within it." His logic was as unyielding as the granite peaks. Whatever was gouging the land could be a far greater plague, a venomous blight from careless dumping the shadow of some illicit enterprise or the trembling of the very bones of the earth. And investigating such things fell squarely under the purview of the Forest Service. "Will you help me?" James asked. "Will you lend your station to discover what new evil stirs in the deep woods?" My thoughts drifted back to the twilight encounter of the night before. I recalled the sentient eyes that had measured my soul, the creature that understood the silent language of a tobacco offering. I pondered James Running's story of his ancestor and the starving Sasquatch family of 80 years of delicate coexistence and shared respect. "Yes," I said the word, feeling heavier than stone. "But I need your wisdom as well. I need you to teach me how to communicate with them, how to show deference, how to move through their lands without trespass. If I am to undertake this quest, I cannot do so as a blundering intruder." For the first time since our meeting, a genuine smile illuminated James Running's face. "Then we have an accord. Come to my home this evening. I will draw you a map to guide your first steps. It is in Pine Ridge, the old house by the silent lumber mill. We will speak further, and I will share the wisdom you seek." He began to walk down the trail, then paused, looking back at me. "What tale will you tell your supervisor about Section 7? He asked. My mind went to Steve Williams impatiently waiting for my report and to the ghostly images I'd captured, of impossible footprints and destruction that beggared belief. I'll tell him the trail has sustained significant damage from an unknown source and recommend that the section be temporarily closed for safety reasons pending further investigation. That is, after all, the technical truth. "You are learning," James Running said with a note of approval. "Some truths must be swaddled in careful language to be protected." He continued down the path, and I watched him disappear into the emerald tapestry of the woods before shouldering my pack and following. I had a report to compose, a supervisor to appease, and tonight an education to commence. The forest, which only 3 days ago had been a familiar map, now felt like an uncharted ocean teeming with unimagined mysteries. And somewhere in its fathomless depths, a dissonance was sounding a note so wrong it disturbed creatures who had known this land for millennia. Whatever it was, I had to find it. I spent that afternoon at the ranger station composing the most carefully wrought and poetically vague report of my career. Steve Williams read it twice his brow, furrowing at my carefully chosen phrases like extensive structural damage from an unknown source and recommend immediate closure pending investigation of potential safety hazards. He clearly found it distasteful, but he was chained by the facts I presented. The photographs of those monstrous footprints were a silent, undeniable testimony. The splintered trees and the savaged earth were undeniable proof that some great upheaval had occurred in Section 7. "You think this is vandalism?" he asked, his eyes locked on a photo of the toppled Douglas fir. "I don't have a name for what it is," I replied, the honesty of it feeling heavy. "But until we comprehend the nature of the beast, that area is no place for hikers or work crews. It could be dangerous." Steve Williams sighed a sound of weary resignation and stamped the report with his approval. "All right, Section 7 is closed effective immediately. I'll have the signs posted at the trailhead, but Mike, I'm counting on you to unravel this mystery. We can't keep a major trail closed indefinitely with an explanation as thin as an unknown source." "I'm on the trail," I assured him. That evening, my pickup rumbled through Pine Ridge, a town that was little more than a whisper on the landscape, consisting of a general store, a gas station, and a few scattered houses. James Running had said his home was near the old lumber mill, and I found it without trouble a lone sentinel against the falling night. If you're intrigued by where this journey is heading, hit that like button and share this with a fellow mystery lover. The mill was a forgotten relic, a skeleton of rusted machinery standing as a silent testament beside the ghost of a mill pond. Just beyond its decay sat a small house, perhaps 800 square feet, clad in weathered cedar siding with a stone chimney from which a thin ribbon of smoke curled into the cooling evening air. James Running was waiting on the porch as I drove up. He offered a simple hand in greeting, a gesture that beckoned me from my world into his. The interior was a haven, simple but profoundly comfortable, warmed by a wood stove's gentle breath. The space was filled with handmade furniture and walls that served as a tapestry of a life lived covered with photographs spanning decades. I saw younger versions of James Running in so many, always. In the company of his people, their faces etched with the stories of ceremonies, gatherings, and fishing trips. But my gaze was drawn as if by some unseen force to the maps. An entire wall was a cartographer's dream, a mural of topographic maps depicting the Mount Hood National Forest and its surrounding territories. Yet, these were no standard government-issue charts. They were living documents annotated with a secret language of colored markers. Bold red lines demarcating boundaries, serene blue circles indicating water sources, and green squares scattered like emeralds through the deepest parts of the woods. "The green marks their ancestral lands," James Running explained, his voice as soft as the evening air, noticing my fixation. "Or, at least where they dwelled some 6 months ago. The red lines are the borders they've asked us to honor. The blue circles, those are the places of council we've established over the years." I stepped closer, my eyes tracing the annotated geography. The green squares claimed a vast remote kingdom of the forest, a realm where trails faded into whispers and even the most seasoned hikers dared not venture. "How many of them are out there in this region?" I asked. "Perhaps 40, maybe 50 souls. 3 main family clans that we know of, though there may be others hidden deeper in the high country that we have never met." James Running poured rich, dark coffee from a pot warming on the wood stove and handed me a heavy ceramic mug. "The family I know best," he continued, "is a clan of about 12. The elder mother, her mate, their children, and other extended kin. This is where the story gets incredibly personal. If you're as captivated by this as I was, please hit that like button to show your support." "The elder mother. She is the one from the photograph, the one who guided me to the sites of destruction." My voice was barely a whisper. "Can you take me to her?" James Running studied me, his eyes peering over the rim of his coffee mug like a hawk from a high perch. "That all depends," he said slowly. "Are you prepared to enter their world not as a conqueror but as a guest, to follow the ancient protocols that have kept the peace between our peoples for generations?" "Teach me." I said the words, a solemn vow. James Running nodded a silent acceptance and sat at a worn wooden table. I joined him, and for the next 2 hours the world outside ceased to exist. He began to share the sacred knowledge and oral history passed down through countless generations of his tribe. The forest people, he explained, were deeply connected to their land, territorial but not inherently hostile. Theirs is a world built on the rhythm of the seasons and the sanctity of ancient agreements. They value routine predictability and the clear definition of boundaries. The councils his tribe held with them followed these strict, unwritten laws. Specific places, specific times, and specific offerings formed the grammar of their diplomacy. Salmon was the prized gift during the fall, runs venison in the heart of winter, and berries and roots in the warmth of summer. These offerings were never left haphazardly. They were placed at designated shrines marked by stacked stones or symbols carved into the bark of ancient trees. Communication was a bridge built of feeling, not just words. The forest people, he said, understood the language of the heart tone, and intent mattered far more than spoken words. They had their own symphony, a vocabulary of howls, screams, and whistles to convey a spectrum of meaning. The forest itself became their drum. Wood knocks were their telegrams across the miles. 3 distinct knocks served as a warning. 5 meant stay away. And a complex rhythmic pattern was an invitation to me to call to come forward. Have you ever heard unexplained sounds deep in the woods? Share your own story in the comments below. We'd love to read it. They possess an intelligence far deeper than most people realize. James Running emphasized his gaze unwavering. They understand the great chain of cause and effect. They plan for the future. They care for their wounded and their elders. They have a culture, a river of traditions flowing through generations. My own grandfather once witnessed them, conducting what he could only describe as a funeral rite for one of their fallen. They covered the body with a cairn of stones and a blanket of evergreen boughs. And the entire family stood in a solemn circle, their voices joined in a low, mournful chant. The image flooded my mind, and I thought of the creature I'd seen, of those intelligent eyes that held the wisdom of the wild. Why do they hide? I asked. Why not make themselves known? James Running answered with a question that pierced my soul. Would you reveal yourself to a species that so often destroys what it does not understand, that captures, studies, and cages anything it deems unusual? James Running's voice was as gentle as moss, but as unyielding as granite. The forest people have been the silent witnesses to human history for thousands of years. They saw what became of the wolf, the grizzly, the buffalo. They watched as our own people were pushed onto reservations, our lands stolen, our ways nearly erased from the earth. They are wise enough to remain phantoms, to survive in the margins and the shadows where modern man rarely looks. He then reached for something, a map drawn not by a machine but by a human hand. It was a map far more intricate than the official topographic chart on his wall, a living document of the land. The scars upon the forest are here, and here, he said, his finger tracing 3 points deep within the untamed heart of the wilderness, a staggering 15 miles from the faintest whisper of a road. The newest wound, he added grimly, was inflicted 3 weeks ago. Then his voice dropped with reverence. The Elder Mother will grant us an audience at this very location. His finger rested on a spot marked with a simple blue circle. We meet her there tomorrow as the dawn spills over the mountains, but only if we honor the old ways with a calling ceremony tonight. A calling ceremony. James Running rose and took down a small drum from a high shelf, its hide painted with symbols that spoke a language my modern eyes could not comprehend. At the stroke of midnight, he declared, we journey to the boundary marker on Thunder Ridge. I will send a message through the drum, a song sung in the old tongue, to let them know we seek counsel. If they accept our plea, they will answer with a chorus of their own. And if the forest remains silent, he shrugged a simple gesture that belied the gravity of our quest. We wait for another moon, another night. I had to ask, and if they do agree? His eyes met mine. Then we meet the Elder Mother at the break of dawn. Oh, you must come bearing a gift. I have a king salmon in my freezer you may offer. You will conduct yourself with the utmost respect. Your movements must be a slow dance, your gaze soft and indirect, never lingering too long. You must never attempt to bridge the space between you with a touch. Your words must be calm and woven from truth, and you must listen. Truly listen, when they choose to speak. James Running punctuated his words by refilling his coffee mug, the simple act grounding the otherworldly conversation. Oh, you must understand, Mr. Johnson, what I offer you is not mere information. It is a sacred trust, a knowledge my people have guarded like a flame through countless generations. Should you betray that trust, should you cast this pearl before the world for fame or fortune, you risk shattering not only the lives of the forest people but the very covenant my tribe has painstakingly woven with them over centuries. I understand, I replied, the word feeling small but carrying the weight of an oath. I seek no accolades. My purpose is born from the threat that looms over these woods, a shadow that touches every creature dwelling within. It is my duty, my very purpose, to be a guardian of this forest and all its inhabitants. James Running gave a slow, measured nod. Then our paths have truly aligned. We are in agreement. Gather your strength now. The moon has a long climb before midnight, and the journey tomorrow will demand all of you. The path to our meeting is not an easy one. I sought rest on James Running's couch, but my sleep was a restless sea, tossed by waves of revelation. The forest people were not simply an undiscovered species. They were a nation, a culture, with a soul hidden behind a veil of leaves. They possessed a profound intelligence and had made a conscious choice for seclusion. Yet some dark force was now threatening their ancient pact, driving them from lands that had cradled their ancestors for centuries. At 11:30 that night, James Running's touch on my shoulder pulled me from my troubled dreams. We pushed my pickup down a skeletal forest road until the wilderness reclaimed its territory, forcing us to continue on foot. For 40 minutes, our flashlights cut lonely beams through the profound dark, guiding us to the boundary marker on Thunder Ridge. It was a natural outcropping of stone, crowned with a cairn of smaller rocks stacked with an unmistakable, deliberate artistry. This was a place of meaning, and I knew that someone, surely James Running, had tended to this quiet sentinel for many years. James Running placed his drum upon the earth and brought out a pouch of tobacco, sprinkling the fragrant leaves in a sacred circle around the marker. And then he began to play. The beat was the steady rhythmic pulse of a heart, an echo that rolled through the sleeping forest. After the rhythm had established itself in the night air, his voice rose in song, a language I could not parse with my mind. The words belonged to his people, but the melody, it was haunting, ancient, a sound that felt as if it had been born of the very rock and root of these mountains. If you find this as moving as I do, please hit that like button to show your appreciation. His song and drum filled the night for perhaps 10 minutes. Then the music ceased, and a silence so profound it was almost a sound in itself fell upon us. We waited, holding our breath. For a timeless moment there was nothing, and then from the deep northern heart of the forest an answer came. It was not the jarring, aggressive howls I had heard before, but something entirely different, a series of low, almost melodic notes that rose and fell in a clear lyrical pattern, a direct answer to James Running's ancient song. A slow smile spread across James Running's face. They accept our request. We meet them at dawn. We made our way back to his house to seek what little rest we could, but my mind was a storm of anticipation and a profound electric anxiety. At 4:30 in the morning, in the cold blue hour before the dawn, we were awake and loading our packs. James Running entrusted me with a large frozen salmon, its silver body wrapped in plastic, which I carefully placed in my pack alongside my water, energy, bars, my camera, and the blank pages of my field notebook. Remember, James Running said, his voice low and serious as we stood at the threshold, you will follow my lead. Let your silence be your guide unless they address you first. Your respect must be a constant, silent prayer. And what you witness, what you learn, it must be locked away. The survival of the forest people hinges upon the world remaining blind to their existence. I promise, I said, and the words were an oath that resonated in the very marrow of my bones. We drove again, chasing the ghosts of roads until they vanished completely. And then we walked into the arms of the dawn, our path leading us toward a meeting that promised to unveil not just the grim mystery of the destruction, but the profound truth of a people who had survived by becoming a living myth, masters of remaining hidden in plain sight for millennia. The sun was just beginning to spill its liquid gold over the mountain peaks when we finally arrived at the appointed meeting place. Share this video if you believe some mysteries are worth protecting. We found ourselves in a clearing, a sacred stage encircled by ancient cedars with a creek whispering its timeless secrets as it flowed along one side. And there, at the meadow's furthest edge, waiting like statues carved from the shadows of the tree line, stood 3 immense figures. James Running had led me to this sacred threshold to stand before the very soul of the forest. Three figures like titans from a forgotten age stood etched against the tree line so motionless I felt the world hold its breath, forcing me to remember to draw my own. The central figure was a colossus standing an easy 8 feet tall. Her hair, the color of sun-bleached wood, kissed with the silver of countless seasons around her wise face and powerful shoulders. This was her, I knew it in my soul, the elder mother of whom James Running had spoken in such reverent whispers. Flanking her were two guardians just shy of her stature, but still giants, each a staggering 7 feet tall. One bore the formidable breadth of a male, a bulwark of quiet strength. The other, more slender, possessed a warrior's grace I read as female. James Running's hand on my arm was a silent anchor in the rising tide of my awe, a gentle reminder to remain still. He then advanced with measured, respectful steps, stopping when a gulf of 30 feet separated him from the tree line. I followed in his shadow, my gaze lowered in a posture I prayed conveyed the deep deference I felt. James Running spoke in his native tongue the words an ancient river of sound, his tone a testament to a humility that needed no translation. The elder mother responded, her voice a tapestry woven from deep rumbles and high melodic notes. It was a primal opera of low, resonant hums and sharp, syllabic cries. A true dialogue was unfolding before me, a counsel between man and the spirit of the wilderness. This was a language of reason, of culture, something that soared far beyond simple animal calls. James Running turned to me, his voice low. "Take out the salmon, place it on the ground, and step back." I obeyed without question, setting our humble peace offering on the meadow grass and retreating to stand beside James Running. The younger male stepped forward, his movement a fluid dance of caution, his eyes never leaving ours as he claimed the tribute. He presented the gift to the elder mother, who inspected it with a quiet, discerning gravity, then uttered a low, sonorous note that resonated deep in my chest, a sound I could only interpret as acceptance. Then, with a gesture that transcended species, as human-like as it was ancient, the elder mother beckoned us to follow. She turned a living shadow and melted into the emerald depths of the forest, her two guardians flowing silently in her wake. James Running and I shared a silent pact of wonder and trepidation in a single glance, then followed, maintaining a reverent distance of some 20 feet. For nearly an hour, we journeyed deeper into a cathedral of old-growth timber. The way grew into a verdant labyrinth, but our guides moved with an innate grace, flowing under branches and over obstacles that forced our clumsy human forms to scramble and struggle. They belonged to this wild cathedral in a way no human ever could, their presence an undeniable testament to the old world. It's a humbling thought, and if you agree, hit that like button. Eventually, we emerged into a narrow canyon, a chasm carved by time where a stream tumbled over moss-covered rocks like liquid music. And there, gouged into the ancient stone of the canyon wall, was a wound so violent, so profane, it stopped my heart cold in my chest. It was the same desecration James Running had shown me in the Polaroid, but magnified into a fresh, gaping nightmare. A massive crater, a maw of ruin 40 feet across, had been blasted from the living rock. A chaotic halo of stone and earth lay scattered everywhere. Within a 100-foot radius, trees stood like shattered skeletons stripped of their living branches. But my eyes were drawn to the mechanical heart of the wound, to what lay within the crater. The mangled viscera of technology, twisted metal, severed cables, the fractured housing of some infernal machine. The elder mother's voice cut through the air, a series of sharp, guttural cries of anguish and rage. Her arm swept across the scene of destruction, a gesture that was both a lament and an accusation. James Running moved closer to sift through the technological bones, and I joined him, a cold dread settling deep in my gut. As a U.S. Forest Service employee, I've seen my share of abandoned equipment, but this bore the unmistakable signature of seismic testing gear. "I know what this is," I said quietly, pulling a piece of scarred metal from the dirt. It had an insignia stamped on it, a corporate logo I recognized with a sickening lurch. Pacific Mining and Exploration. They run seismic tests for mining companies and energy prospectors. A storm cloud passed over James Running's features. Exploration. Here. This is protected forest land. That doesn't always stop them, I replied grimly. They hide behind research permits that are technically legal. But in reality, they're just drawing a treasure map for exploitation, looking for mineral deposits or potential drilling sites. I raised my camera, documenting the crime scene from every angle. This equipment uses explosive charges, I explained, to create miniature earthquakes. They measure the returning shock waves to read the secret story of the Earth's bones and find what they can take. The elder mother vocalized again a new urgency, a plea coloring her tone. James Running listened, then translated his face a mask of grief. She says there have been 4 sites like this. The explosions come without warning, like a thunderclap from a clear sky. Loud, violent, terrifying. He continued, his voice cracking. The first one, it killed 2 of their young who were foraging nearby. They found their bodies crushed by the falling rocks. My God, what would you even do? Let me know in the comments how this story is hitting you. A wave of nausea and fury washed over me. When was the first explosion? I asked. 4 months ago, James Running said, under the February full moon. The cold arithmetic of this horror was simple. 4 sites in 4 months meant this assault was ongoing. They're moving systematically through the deep forest, probably following a standard grid pattern. If they are, there will be more, I said. These surveys can cover dozens of square miles. This is just devastating. If you believe this kind of destruction needs to be stopped, please hit that like button and share this video. The elder mother gestured for us to follow her once more. Over the next 3 hours, she led us on a somber pilgrimage to 2 more sites of destruction. Each location showed the same brutal pattern of explosive damage, scattered equipment, and the clear cold signature of seismic testing. The forest people had been keeping a grim tally, bearing silent witness to the invasion of their home, as if attempting to comprehend the unseen force assailing their ancestral lands. It was at the 3rd site that the elder mother did something that transcended all expectation. She selected a fallen branch and, with a grace that defied her immense size, began to sketch upon the damp, yielding earth by the stream. The images she drew were stark, yet possessed a profound clarity, circles from which lines radiated like a malevolent sun speaking of the explosions. Then came the hurried forms of her people in flight, their simple lines conveying a world of terror. And, finally, a symbol that chilled me to the bone, a question mark, a glyph of human curiosity and confusion etched into the forest floor. Her silent question hung in the air, a plea for understanding. James Running knelt beside her, a silent communion passing between them, and I followed suit. Finding my own stick, I attempted to answer her silent query, sketching a crude map of our world's logic layers of Earth, the machinery above, and the violent waves we sent plunging into the planet's heart. It was a child's scrawl, a poor translation of a terrible truth. Yet, the elder mother observed it with a piercing focus, her dark ancient eyes absorbing every line with a formidable intelligence. What do you all think about this? Could a non-human species really communicate with such depth? Let me know your theories in the comments. When my explanation was complete, a low, sorrowful cry echoed from her, a sound that seemed to carry the grief of the entire forest. Then her hand moved again, adding to the earthen canvas more figures, but these were struck through, their stories ended. Then she drew others scattered and retreating from the circles of destruction, fleeing into exile into unknown lands. She was painting a saga of the true cost of those terrible sounds, not just noise, but death exile, and the desecration of their homes, and the sacred grounds her people had walked for uncounted generations. This has to end, I said, my voice low and fierce, turning to James Running. This is a flagrant violation on federal land. A Pacific mining and exploration has no right, no authorization to conduct this kind of work in a protected wilderness. James Running's eyes met mine, filled with a desperate hope. Can you use your position to do something? Yes, I affirmed, but it requires a delicate touch. My mind raced the pieces of a strategy locking into place. I would document everything as unauthorized activity, focusing on the catastrophic environmental damage. My report would climb the ladder of official channels, the forest supervisor, the regional office, and if necessary I would bring in the EPA. Pacific Mining and Exploration would see their permits revoked, face crippling fines, and be forced to cease all operations. But you cannot speak of the forest people. James Running insisted, his voice a strained whisper. If the world of men learns they exist, He didn't need to finish the sentence. The unspoken consequences were horrifying. "I won't," I swore to him. "The environmental devastation is our sword and shield here. The obliteration of old-growth habitat, the poison from the explosives threatening the water, the chaos inflicted upon the wildlife, that alone is more than enough. It's all documented, providing all the legal ammunition we need to shut this down for good." I rose to my feet and turned to the elder mother, speaking to her directly, knowing that the heart of my words would reach her, even if the sounds did not. "We will make this stop," I vowed. "There will be no more thunder in your earth, I promise you." The elder mother regarded me for a long, silent moment, her gaze seeming to weigh the very soul of my intention before she uttered a soft, resonant sound. Then she extended a massive, weathered hand and so gently rested it upon my shoulder. The touch was fleeting, but it conveyed a universe of meaning, a fragile trust, a desperate hope, and a silent plea to be the guardian of her people and their sacred home. If you've ever felt a connection with nature that you can't explain, hit that like button. Let's see how many of us have felt that call. We made our way back to the meadow where we first met, and just as before, the three forest people seemed to dissolve into the gloaming, melting into the shadows as if they were nothing more than a trick of the fading light. James Running and I remained standing in the silence, the weight of the encounter settling upon us. "Now I understand," I finally said, breaking the quiet. "This is why your family has maintained contact for all these years. It is more than tradition. It is a profound responsibility. We are the bridge," James Running replied, his gaze lost in the trees. "A fragile crossing between their ancient world and your new one. When your world encroaches upon theirs, whether born of ignorance or of avarice, we attempt to intervene to be their shield. But our strength is not infinite. At times, we need an ally in your world, someone with understanding and authority." "I understand now," I said the words, feeling truer than any I had spoken before, "and I will move heaven and earth to help." The week that followed was a whirlwind of focused action. I assembled a fortress of documentation, detailed reports, stark photographs of the ravaged sites, images of the abandoned equipment. I named Pacific Mining and Exploration, and methodically laid out their complete lack of proper permits for conducting explosive tests within a protected wilderness. My next call was to the regional EPA office, where I highlighted the litany of potential and flagrant environmental violations. The gears of bureaucracy grind slowly, but my case was undeniable, and they began to turn. A mere 2 weeks later, federal agents descended upon Pacific Mining and Exploration's field office. Their operations were shuttered, silenced, pending a full investigation. In the end, the company would face a staggering penalty of over $2 million in fines and a permanent ban from all federal land operations. But the true victory, the one that mattered, was the silence. The explosions had stopped. If you love seeing justice served like this, please share this video with a friend who appreciates stories of hope. The forest people would finally return to their ancestral homes to walk the earth in peace. James Running relayed the news in a brief, quiet phone call. A message had come from the elder mother. She had sent word through the rustling leaves and silent paths that peace had returned to the deep woods. I continued my duties as a trail inspector, but every step I took was now informed by a profound new understanding of what and who I was truly protecting. These forests were not merely collections of trees and trails on a map. They were a living, breathing home, a sanctuary, for beings who had been here since the dawn of the continent, long before the first of my own kind arrived. And I learned that to truly protect them meant to become a keeper of secrets, guarding a truth that the modern world was not yet ready to comprehend. From that day on, James Running and I became allies, regular contacts in a silent pact. He would call from time to time, his voice a quiet messenger carrying whispers from the forest people of strange activities in the deep woods, and I in my own way would investigate using the tools of my world to protect theirs. I became a master of crafting plausible narratives, weaving bureaucratic justifications that allowed me to intervene, never once breathing a word of the true, otherworldly source of my information. The boundary stones in Section 7 remained untouched, and I made it my solemn vow that this sacred ground would remain a sanctuary, closed to the thunderous march of heavy equipment. Often, on my solitary inspections of the trails, I would pause and leave a small offering of tobacco at these stone sentinels. It was a quiet communion, an acknowledgement of the ancient beings I knew watched me from the deep, whispering shadows. Then, in the languid heat of August, a package found its way to my desk at the ranger station. Inside rested a figure carved from fragrant cedar. Standing about 6 inches tall, it depicted two beings side by side, a human and a tall, hair-shrouded figure of the forest. No note was enclosed, but I knew it came from James Running, or perhaps it was a missive from a world beyond him. It was a silent, powerful reminder of the covenant made in that sun-drenched meadow, a symbol of the fragile bridge we had built between two worlds. That little carving sat on my desk for the rest of my career, a constant, quiet companion. Whenever my colleagues would ask about it, my voice a calm river over hidden depths, I'd tell them it was a gift from a native elder I had worked with on wilderness preservation projects, which, in its own way, was the gospel truth. What I left unsaid was the deeper tale. It told a story of a promise kept a secret held sacrosanct, and the profound, humbling knowledge that in the deepest heart of the woods, in those hallowed places where ancient trees pierce the sky and the foot of man seldom treads, we were not alone. I had learned that some mysteries are not meant to be unraveled. If you believe some things are better left a mystery, hit that like button to let us know. They are meant to be honored, to be protected, and to be allowed their peace in the shadows where they have thrived for millennia. And sometimes the greatest discovery isn't revealing a truth to the world. It is becoming a silent guardian of that truth, ensuring that beings who have chosen the sanctity of silence can continue to live in peace. What do you think? Drop a comment below and tell me if you'd be able to keep a secret this immense. The forest people were as real as the stone and soil beneath my feet. They had been meeting with James Running's people for generations, not out of idle curiosity or mere friendship, but because both peoples understood a truth as old as the mountains, that survival sometimes means forging alliances between different worlds, protecting one another from threats neither could hope to face alone. And I, a man of the modern world, was now part of that ancient agreement, a contemporary guardian of a timeless secret, standing watch over forests that held far more than just trees and trails. They held the last bastion, the final refuge of beings who had survived by becoming one with the shadows, and I would summon every ounce of my strength and will to ensure they could continue to do so undisturbed for all time. If this story resonated with you, please share it so others may ponder the great mysteries our world still holds.